Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Hepper, Director of Activation at State Library of Queensland, and on behalf of State Librarian and CEO Vicky McDonald and my colleagues here, I welcome you to a very fashionable Game Changers event. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we gather on tonight, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land and as custodians of stories for over 60,000 years. It's a privilege to work on this land, continuing a tradition of caring for and sharing stories. And I'd like to acknowledge all First Nations people here with us tonight. I extend a warm welcome to our speakers, Jane Milburn and Troy Casey, our facilitator, Melanie Finger, Professor Amanda Goodmanson from QUT, members of the Library Board of Queensland and Queensland Library Foundation Council, members of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Management Committee and Induction Committee, our founding partner QUT, our generous partners and sponsors, Picture Partners, Channel 7, Morgans, Ray White and Springfield City Group, and friends and supporters of State Library joining us here at the library and online. Game Changers is a Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame initiative made possible through our partnership with QUT. Together, we recognise and honour those who've made a significant contribution to the Queensland business landscape. And Brisbane Fashion Month is the perfect time to celebrate our leaders in the fashion industry. According to a report from the Australia Institute earlier this year, Australians buy more clothes per person than any other country, more than America, more than the UK or China. That's an average of 56 new items of clothing per person each year. I think we'll have lots to talk about there. So what is fueling this spending, and are the diverse needs of consumers being met? Tonight we have two thought leaders who will be sharing their wisdom on innovation and fairness in fashion. Jane Milburn of Textile Beat will challenge you to reconsider how our fashion affects our communities and our environment, and I'm sure we'll delve into those 56 new items a year. And Troy Casey from Magpie Goose will talk about sovereignty, respect and celebration in fashion. Melanie Finger will facilitate this evening's conversation. Melanie is a senior lecturer in transdisciplinary design and the academic lead engagement for the School of Design at QUT. She has over 25 years of experience in the fashion industry and design education. Melanie has international experience in clothing design and manufacturing and has worked with David Jones, Target, Myer and international boutiques, as well as marketing for brands such as Bindi Wear, Bindi Irwin's clothing line. This conversation tonight is also being broadcast on State Library's website, so a warm welcome to everyone joining us online tonight. And if you want to share your thoughts about tonight's conversation on social media, use the hashtag QBLHOF, H-O-F. We'll be using Slido to collect questions from online viewers and you here in the audience tonight. Go to slido.com and enter the event code QBLHOF, or simply scan the QR code that appears on the screen throughout the event. Melanie will do her best to get to as many questions as possible. I'd also like to invite you to visit our latest exhibition, the Brisbane Portrait Prize, here on level 2 after the talk. The exhibition celebrates the heart of Brisbane Meanjin, telling the stories of the courageous, creative and passionate people who make up our city. If you're watching online, you can visit our website to enjoy these mesmerising works of art. Thank you and enjoy tonight's conversation.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Melanie. Thank you so much, Catherine Hepper, for that introduction. Catherine's the Director of Activations here at the State Library of Queensland. And also, I noticed you're wearing a Magpie Goose piece. Well done. And thank you to the State Library for putting on this event. We're very happy to be here and very excited to share with you guys and hear your questions as well. So I'd also like to pay respect to the Turrbal and the Yagara, and at QUT it's particularly important to us that the lands have always been places of teaching and learning. Unfortunately, our third panellist, Jessie Sadler, is unable to attend tonight's panel conversation, but I'd like to thank our esteemed guests that we've got on stage here today, Jane Milburn and Troy Casey. These speakers, I know you're probably bashful about this, but epitomise the game-changing theme of entrepreneurship, collaboration, leadership, sustainability, diversification, and the economic development of Queensland. And we all look forward to hearing your stories. We have two Auslan interpreters here tonight, so I want to thank Lauren and Kelly tonight for the help that you're giving us and the work that you're doing. And I want to also welcome those that are joining us online. For our in-person guests, we have emergency exits on both doors, at the front and the rear. If you need to leave the event, please go up the stairs and exit via the back door, not the lower door. And I remind our in-person audience to have your phones off, please. But have them on hand for the Slido. So I think we've still got the slide will be there throughout the night. So the Slido there, if you just go to that slido.com and enter the code QBLHOF or scan that code, and that'll take you straight to there, because I've got questions prepared, but there might be something that I haven't asked that you're dying to know, so please put those on the Slido as well. So in tonight's panel, we're going to delve into innovation, culture, community, creativity, responsibility, and those economic realities of fashion, which we were just discussing before. But I thought we'd just start off with a brief introduction from each of our speakers about their fashion-related business. So I might ask Jane, do you want to go first?
Thanks. Well, for me, it's always been about the fibres. It's natural fibres. I grew up on a farm. I studied agricultural science, and then my first proper job was as an ABC rural journalist. So I went along this journey. I come from a resource perspective, not a fashion perspective. And then I had decades of advocacy for farm groups. And I guess I watched the emergence of the food story as well. I had an opportunity to do the Australian Rural Leadership Program, where 60 days of personal and professional development, which was a fabulous opportunity. And I guess probably as a result of that, we were trained to step up and lead where we saw leadership was needed. And in 2011, I went to a Fashion for Flood fundraiser, and I bought a couple of more expensive items, but at the end of the evening, I could buy 30 shirts for $60, $2 each back in 2011, and I'm thinking, what does that say about how much clothes are around? I started revisiting op shops. At that point, I've always made some of my own clothes, and I bought the shirts because I was making the bottoms, trousers or skirts to go with them. And that really was the turning point for me, where I started to think about what was going on and realised that I could speak out about that. And it took me 2 years to get it to a position, third child finished school situation, to be able to do what I really wanted to do and follow my values and talk about that. So I've just been speaking out since that time. I published a book called Slow Clothing in 2017. There's a copy in State Library. There's 20 copies in the Brisbane Library for borrowing, which is great. And I had someone tell me the other day when I gifted a copy to a school, and I said, oh, it's a bit old now, but she said, oh, you were ahead of your time with it, and it's mainly talking about the resources. Of course, I'm concerned about the exploitation, but it's the volume's the big problem. And I was fortunate to win a Churchill Fellowship on the topic in 2019, and I travelled in 2022, and so perhaps talk about that a bit later, after we've heard a bit from Troy.
Well, that was a good teaser. Okay, Troy.
Absolutely lovely. Thank you. Just also want to pay my respect to Yaga and Turrbal community and the elders and mob who have taken care of this land since time immemorial. Sustainability is not a new thing for us as Aboriginal people. We have cared for these lands and this continent, which is now called Australia, for over 65,000 years, and you don't do that by buying fast fashion, let's say that. Look, my name's Troy Casey, I'm a Kamilaroi man. My family are from Collarenebri, Walgett, which is in northwest New South Wales. If you don't know where that is, Lightning Ridge, Moree, Tamworth is a little bit further north. And Magpie Goose is a social enterprise fashion label. I'll tell you a bit more about the evolution of that company a bit later this evening. But it's owned by myself and my beautiful and amazingly talented partner, Amanda Heyman, who is in the audience this evening and is actually the real brains and brawn behind Magpie Goose, but doesn't like speaking in public as much as I do. So I'm up here tonight. I generally wear all black, so this is like lots of colour for me. But at the same time, I love what we do as an organisation, and by no means is it about me or Amanda as individuals as much as it is about a collective conversation. And I think that's a really important part of tonight's conversation here at the State Library. It's everyone's responsibility, what we're talking about this evening, and I think it's serendipitous, and I think things happen for a reason that you and I are sitting here this evening, Jane, to talk about the real issues around fashion and sustainable fashion in particular, or ethical fashion as well. But our business is about working with Indigenous artists and communities, so not always necessarily artists by trade, but Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities around the country, particularly in rural and or remote areas, who have limited opportunities for economic support or engagement, but also limited opportunities to understand what fashion is all about, and how can we work with them to think about textile design, turn those designs into prints and into beautiful garments that you can all buy at www.magpiegoose.com.au.
Did everyone get that?
But yeah, look, I'm really excited to be here tonight. As I said, like, I fell into this as well, and I was very surprised by a lot of things that I'm sure we'll talk more about this evening.
Yes, we can unpack the realities of the fashion industry. So tonight's event is the Game Changer event. So a game changer is one who approaches business in a way that disrupts the status quo. And I can already feel that from what you're saying right now. So challenges the norms and creates a new way of doing things. Do you see yourself as a game changer? And I guess sort of what differentiates what you do from, I guess, what other fashion brands do?
Well, I'm definitely disrupting the status quo. I talk about clothing. I don't really talk about fashion because fashion by definition is always changing. So how can that be sustainable? So that's one point of difference. I guess I felt I needed to speak out with an independent voice because I had no vested interest. I was just talking about what I was seeing. And it turns out now that this problem has, now that it's been quantified more, I mean, I did some basic maths back then. I found some figures about us being, at that point, we were the second largest consumers. We've now become the largest. This was, back in 2016, I think I did the maths on that. And then I found a figure from the Australian Bureau of Statistics about the volume of textiles in landfill, and I divided it by the population in that year. and came up with the 27 kilos going to landfill, 23 kilos to landfill, 27 kilos we were buying. Now that landfill stat probably included things like carpets, and now there's much better data that's available through the Australian Fashion Council. They've defined it, I think it's 15 kilos of clothing that we're purchasing on average every year. So there's a huge problem that was sort of sitting there, and you could see the changing fibres. That was the thing that bothered me, is that 2/3 of it is synthetic, derived from petroleum.
Yep.
Shedding microplastic particles, and like this has all really just emerged now, and it was Dr. Mark Brown that did that research to show that when we're washing clothes, synthetics, that they're shedding the microplastic particles. And it's not just clothes, it's actually all the synthetic cushion covers and all that sort of stuff as well, carpets. It's a problem that is not... We don't know enough about the health implications yet, and I heard Dr. Brown talk at Science Week in Brisbane at one point, and he likened it to asbestos 2.0, it was asbestos 2.0, in that it's an emerging problem, and all of the cheap, fast fashion that we get is, most of it's synthetic and blended, which creates a problem as well.
Yeah. So you see your game-changing move as education?
Yeah, it's education and leading by example, I guess. I like that thought leader thing. Like, to me, that's what I am. I'm wearing a dress that I have worn for, this is the 58th time I've worn it, #Adventures of the Red Dress on Instagram.
I love it.
And,
So good.
it's actually about re-wearing. Hello, how easy is that? The best way to be sustainable is to keep wearing what you've already got. I've had to mend it a couple of times. It's cooler, so I'm wearing something underneath it. And I took it on my Churchill Fellowship and wore it. And it's interesting because people think, oh, special occasion, need a new dress, but where does that come from? And also, I make a lot of my clothes. This was made from 4 thrifted garments that I found in the op shop and one from my wardrobe, and it's made of squares and rectangles, and it's made to fit my body, which is smaller here and bigger here, so I've always got flexibility for eating more chocolate if I need to, although I'm trying to not do that now. But, it will always fit me, that's the point.
Yeah.
And so these are factors that I think we're conditioned to be consumers of fashion and follow and think. We're intimidated, we feel insecure about what we're wearing. Oh, we've got to buy this, or we've got to do that, we've got to look special on that day, and all of that. So we are following, it's a psychological operation that you've got to look a certain way and have a certain thing, and that is what drives the whole consumption matter, whereas buying a quality piece that has a good story to tell, and you can tell the story about it, to me that's more meaningful, and I think that's part of the answer, is we've got to get back to having quality clothing with meaning and connection, and having some skills so you can mend it. I have actually had to mend this, whereas we sort of think we're too good for that or something, that we don't make, we don't mend, but why not? Because it gives us we're hardwired to be wanting to make. It's part of our psychosocial need. And we're, I'm a professional too, I've had the advantage of education, but that doesn't mean I can't enjoy some, because it's actually very soothing, and there's lots of well-being benefits that go with having some making in our lives, whereas mostly what we do now is our creative behaviour is choosing something that what's the best on offer, I'll just go and that's the level of our design.
And if it doesn't fit, we don't try and fix it, we just pass it on.
Yes, and now with all this online purchasing as well, you can't even feel the fabric, you don't know if it's going to fit you. Yeah. To me, I would never purchase anything that way, although in saying that I have bought one pair of boots online just because I couldn't, but it's not my preferred modus operandi to buy online.
Just maybe to add to that commentary, I think like this notion of clothing that has meaning or story, you know, how often have we heard like, oh, a beautiful dress you're wearing tonight. Oh yeah, I got it from here. And that's kind of the end of that conversation. And so that moment of satisfaction maybe, or the endorphins that spill over, are like super short and quick. It might feel good for a moment, but then that yarn finishes right there. Pardon the pun, yarn is blackfellow way of talking. But that yarn finishes...
Yarn fabric.
Yeah, that yarn finishes right there. But I think, you know, for example, Jane, like, how long could you talk about that dress to someone if they said, oh, beautiful dress you're wearing tonight? It's got sustainability conversations, it's got history of travel, it's got you've made it yourself. It's just like there's like a multitude of ways in which you could engage in a conversation about what you're wearing, not only as fashion, but a way to change the planet for good.
And I guess that's why I do it, to have conversations. One of the, I don't know whether it was on the slide, but I had, I've got a denim pinafore that I made from 2.5 pair of jeans. And when I started wearing that, people, like, you're walking along and they can see what you're on about. They can, because I left all the fittings in there, it was a bit rustically made. They could see that it was cobbled together. And it's instant story.
Absolutely.
You know.
And engagement.
Yes.
And conversation far beyond
and a message in a garment without even really having to say any words.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem with some of the clothes, that they're just designed for multiple shapes, and they're made quickly, so there's no interesting detail in them, no hand stitching or anything like that to stand out and make them look special and worth holding on to.
Yeah. Troy, would you say that your brand, like the sort of the game-changing move for Magpie Goose, is the stories behind the prints? Like, I've already had a few questions about my shirt tonight, thank you. And it's, the story behind these artists, is that kind of what you'd see as part of the Magpie Goose point that separates you from other brands?
Well, thankfully, I thought you were going to ask, why am I a game changer? Which I would
And
have comfortably answered clearly.
Maybe why is Amanda a game changer then?
That's an easier question to answer. The whole reason behind Magpie Goose is to think about ways in which people engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. And fashion is just one of those opportunities. And it's funny, we're kind of talking about these, like, how do you create a conversation about what you're wearing? And, like, really the premise behind this is to bring stories from remote communities that people in this room otherwise may not have had the opportunity to talk about. The shirt I'm wearing tonight is Hats and Boots, and it's a conversation about a story that the artists in Alice Springs, Twatch, which is Hidden Valley Town Camp, want to tell about their community and their country and their culture. And I think the whole premise of this organisation is to bring the stories from those communities to a barbecue on a Sunday in Brisbane, versus them having to be brought to you only on a canvas or only in an art centre or a gallery. I think the game-changing conversation behind Magpie Goose, which is also the same reason all of the organisations that Amanda and I own and operate, is about creating a platform for First Nations communities to tell their stories their way, but also providing economic, employment, training opportunities for those communities as well. Magpie Goose so far in its history has provided over 650 to, I'm looking at Amanda, maybe close to $700,000 worth of artist royalty payments to Aboriginal people in this country. And and that's nowhere near enough. I think the opportunity is huge. When we think about the fashion industry and the way that people engage in that space. And it's huge for our community as the rise in, I guess, engagement with our stories increases. But at the same time, there's a whole set of values that we aspire to be driven by, which is not about consumption, which is not about selling 1 million of these T-shirts, because it's not good for all of the reasons that we're going to talk about. But it's actually about, thinking about things a little bit differently, and as an Aboriginal business, thinking about things from a First Nations values point of view, which is about sustainability, caring for country, and ensuring that our footprint on this place is as minimal as possible. But we'll delve into how hard that actually and really is shortly in this conversation.
Yeah.
Because just to your point about First Nations, one of the photos I share in my PowerPoints when I do talks and workshops is from the Art of Skins exhibition that was here, and there's this beautiful First Nations
Amanda
woman
worked on that.
wearing this fur, and like 150 years ago, everything was, and that's when that photo was from. Everything was natural fibres, and we had Sunday best. It's only very recently that we've had this crazy escalation and associated problems with disposal of the waste and the impact on the environment, from overuse of resources.
I might ask you a quick question that's come up on the Slido there. This is probably for Jane. Although fast fashion is considered bad, doesn't it give people affordable access to clothing?
Yes, it does. But how many clothes do you need? That's probably the question is the volume is the big elephant in the room.
And quality?
Quality, definitely. I guess now there's lots of ways to have affordable clothing. Interesting, people think the place of op shops has changed now. It's actually a lot of young people and people wanting to find a sustainable option, op shopping, and people who really who can't afford to buy the clothes are actually given the clothes by a group called Thread Together. They're giving them new clothes to fit to their size, which is a wonderful endeavour, and that is actually like the leftover clothes that are never sold new. Like there's only apparently a third are sold at full price, a third are sold discounted, and another third used to disappear. And they're the ones that are now given to people who really are in need. I mean, it certainly is affordable, but I guess the price, what's making it affordable? It's actually exploitation. And we have, I don't really like to quite say it so bluntly, but we have the slaves working somewhere else. We can't see them because there's only 3% of clothes sold in Australia are made in Australia. So small brands, Queensland fashion brands.
So you're part of that 3%.
I know.
That's exciting.
And so, yes, they're affordable, but they're too affordable. There's too many of them. And it's very interesting that RMIT recently did some research that was only launched a couple of weeks ago, co-funded by the Queensland Government and Kmart, about keeping clothes out of landfill.
Get out of town.
Yeah.
How ironic.
That is ironic.
You said it.
Here's your dollar T-shirt right there.
Yeah. So, and the good thing is that is, as far as I can know, that's the first piece of wearer research that they were looking at how people care for clothes, how they buy clothes, and that sort of thing. And I think there's a whole lot more to go on that. But for you, one of the things that I really liked to read in that report is that 54% of people surveyed, they talked to 3,000 people, 54% like the idea of having local clothing. So more than half the market is interested in having something local, and they just, I guess, need to, often it's a bit like buying your can of tomatoes at the supermarket, when you see the ones that are Australian and the other ones from Italy or somewhere, they're so much cheaper. It's always a pull about whether you support local and keep local.
Okay.
or you sell yourself out.
Yeah, well, let's go on with that local theme. So let's turn it to about a Queensland context of both of, what you're doing right now in our industry in Queensland. Our industry's changed so much in 30 years, and there's a question here as well about 30 years of what's happened in mass manufacture, and a lot. So for me personally, you heard a bit of my bio before, but my love of Queensland fashion began in the 90s by idolising those designers and models in the televised RAQ Awards. I don't know if anyone else was around back those days, but I just wanted to be all those models and wear Anthony Lee Dower and all those kind of things. So I feel, a little bit old here now, and I used to attend the Wool and Cotton Parade. There used to be 2 different parades at the Ekka. And I visited in the Brisbane Arcade. Our industry has changed so much since those days, and when I studied fashion back in the 90s. But that international brand invasion, coming to Queen's Plaza, plus a multitude of fast fashion labels, the removal of quotas as well, and the amount of stock that could now come in from China. And I produced my clothing in China. I've done the local manufacture thing, and I've also produced offshore. But these high-class events that we have now, like, Brisbane Fashion Month, and, our design exports, like Sass and Bide and Lydia Pearson and Easton Pearson, and these cultural hubs that we have now, like Goma, the Museum of Brisbane, James Street, they've kind of put Brisbane back on the map as well. So there's sort of, for me, all this change of, how we used to shop, what we used to look at, and now this sort of a lot of brands coming to Brisbane. And we have this kind of thriving, exciting indie movement as well. So, and the fashion education sector, a lot more places are, teaching fashion because it is a viable career. And there's so many more sustainable fashion brands. So there's a lot of people really getting on board, Jane, with what you're doing, and social enterprise brands as well, and more inclusive design as well. So I just wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what does Queensland offer to those who aspire to create their own fashion brand? Because there might be a few people out here that are interested in that.
Go first on
that. Are we going dark and then light? Is that the...
I don't know.
I promised I wouldn't be super negative this evening. However...
But we need the truth. We do need the truth.
Look, to be honest, and Amanda sent me a couple of really good dot points earlier, so thanks, Mandy. Our T-shirts that we make, which are just like a brand T-shirt, Magpie Goose T-shirt, they are made from Queensland cotton.
Nice.
They're made in Logan and screen printed in Brisbane as well. And there is, I would say, an emerging potential for manufacturing locally here. Unfortunately, the reality is that if you want to become more than a hobby fashion enterprise and you want to scale your business, that there are not the options and opportunities to do that here. Particularly when you layer all of the complexities of wanting to do the very best possible. So you'll be very happy to hear this. All of our clothing, every single part of it, is all natural fibres, 100%. Nothing synthetic in the mix at all. We have our manufacturer in Sydney, who's an ethical clothing certified manufacturer. We visit him quarterly and go and check out what they're up to. We ensure that none of our clothing comes with any excess packaging from him to us. There's no plastics on it. There's nothing except for the cards that you get. So the little tag that says Magpie Goose and a little bit of cord that goes around that. That's all sourced and made in Australia as well. And our garments are so the fabrics are sourced in Australia. So where they're made is still a question mark for us, definitely. Predominantly China, Southeast Asia, India is where the fabrics are made and sourced. We're not at the volume where we can get a full, transparent conversation about that, i.e. buying bulk, getting it sent here, dyeing it here locally is just not an option for us at our scale. So we're all of the designs are hand screen printed in Sydney. with using environmentally friendly and water-based soluble inks. So any of that waste, obviously, is the least worst for the planet as possible. And then, all of our packaging is environmentally recyclable packaging bags. So whatever we're doing in every aspect of our business is about sustainability and caring for country. Unfortunately, there's not a bunch of that happening locally here in Queensland. I'll do a small shout out. Arts Queensland have just created a First Nations textiles and fashion fund,
Cool.
Which will support, obviously, enterprise here locally. But the sort of volume of funds that are available through those grants aren't really that attractive to a business like ours who is trying to scale beyond where we're at the moment. And that provides a huge challenge for people entering the industry because, for people trying to scale their business, because it's just not enough extra funding. Anyways, I don't know if I really answered anything about Queensland.
That was good.
But look, we would love for the opportunity to have things and places that we can access locally here to support our growth too.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as what we're aware of, currently doesn't exist at the right scale for us to engage in their services.
Yeah.
Aside from, our suppliers in Logan who are, we buy the cotton, they make the T-shirts for us.
Yeah, that's great. Did you have any thoughts on that, Jane?
Yeah, I mean, Queensland, it's all about place. It's place-based. And Queensland produces great cotton and wool. And I still harbour, I thought that wouldn't it be lovely to be able to have, local fibre made. The only cotton that I'm aware of is full circle fibre cotton,
Muriel.
which I think you're using
That's
from
the one
St
we're
George.
using,
That's
great.
Muriel Chamberlain. And the only phase of the operation that we can't do here and that she doesn't do here is the spinning part. And on my Churchill Fellowship, I actually visited where her cotton is being spun in the UK. And, it would be fabulous if we could do more value adding in that way, but I guess it all comes down to volume, and that's really what you've talked about. But I think it's Queensland's great climate. We've got the Olympics coming up, the whole beach culture, and, there's lots of things to celebrate that can make our locally made clothes regeneratively made would be a great thing to highlight. And it actually is just about wearers like us supporting those ones, local ones, rather than sending all the money offshore to these big global companies that are only interested in selling clothes to make. They're only interested in making the money. So it's actually where we spend our money, and buying better quality and fewer items is the way to go. And you can buy something locally. Like I did see Magpie Goose about 6 months ago when I went into the shop just down here, and I was tempted, but I actually thought, do I need another dress? And I thought, no, I don't. So, sorry. But now I think I'd like to have one as a memory now, so I will go and find
Then you
one
can
that
tell the
suits
story
me,
about it. It'll be
and
great.
I will buy it from down here.
I think that really leads into the question too about what you both see as barriers for change. And I think, potentially that barrier, I think Troy is, the production, but also the acceptance of, a $130 T-shirt versus, a $20, $30 sort of shirt. So I don't know if you both want to expand on sort of barriers for change.
I'm happy to go first because it feels like it leads on from some of the yarns we were just having. I mean, if the government, for example, really wanted to support industry, and I'm talking about all levels of government, local, state, and federal, wanted to support local industry made in Australia, there would be significant funding into the fashion industry because it's one of the biggest consumptions that everyone has to wear clothes every day. And for us, unfortunately, we're not seeing huge investments in local production and manufacturing. I mean, yes, we talk about like it as in the global context, and labour is cheaper in other countries, so things become more affordable to manufacture. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a huge campaign around what the benefits are for local manufacturing and supporting industry here in Australia, not only in fashion, but a whole range of other industries as well. One of the other sort of barriers for us is definitely the education piece. And Jane, you've done such a fantastic job over the last number of years now, trying to communicate to people what the benefits of your choice in everyday consumption is, not only to the environment, but to all of us in the way in which we live and work in this country. I think, yes, the price of things is a huge challenge. You know, I talked about all the layers of good that we do as part of our business. I didn't mention the fact that, you know, all of the artworks that we license are through Copyright Agency, which is a copyright organisation here in Australia, who are letting us know that we are paying far beyond what an industry standard for an artist licensing agreement would be for our clothes. But that means they're just expensive. And I have a huge problem with the price that we make our clothes at the same manufacturer that a lot of other Australian-made companies make their clothes at an extremely higher price point. For me, we and Amanda, we're making clothes that are telling Aboriginal stories. If my mob can't afford these, which they can't necessarily all afford them at the moment, we're doing something wrong as well, because we want our community to wear our stories and celebrate our culture as well. But we stand by a particular set of values, and we'll always do it that way. You know, in my opinion, we need, you know, much more government support in what we're doing and the way that we're working. But every single person in this room makes choices every single day about the clothes that they purchase and what they wear. And I think it can start in your house. It can start in a conversation in your own living room. It can start in your dining room table, if people still eat around those things these days. But sharing those stories that Jane is bringing to you, the stories that we can bring to you through our fashion label. But you don't need 100 pieces of clothing in your cupboard either. You need some little bits of pop, but it doesn't have to be full.
Yeah, and I mean, even just buying one, if everybody bought one and they had a beautiful story to tell, wouldn't that make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes a difference to our bank account at the moment. So www.Magpie Goose.
But in terms of barriers to change, I think as a society we're addicted to growth. You know, there's always this, GDP, you know, we've got to go up. Big is always seen to be better, but there's a boundary there, planetary boundary. And one of the people I met on my Churchill was Professor Kate Fletcher in the UK. She's come up with I guess it's a fashion action research plan called Earth Logic, which is the opposite to growth logic. And, you know, she's saying that we need a complete, profound rethink, a paradigm shift away from growth and more towards, I guess, trading in having more time, like time, creativity, community and imagination. They're the things that we would have time for if we didn't have this growth and this need to be always buying more and being better and looking flashier and having the latest and all that kind of thing. And the thing that I loved about what Earth Logic states is that it's the learning and unlearning that we have to do is grounded in the ethics of permaculture. And now permaculture was developed as a design system by Australians 50 years ago in response to industrial agriculture. in response to Rachel Carlson's book, Silent Spring, the use of a lot of chemicals in agriculture. Bill Mollison and David Holmgren came up with permaculture as a design approach based on the ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. And there I was with Kate Fletcher in the UK, and she's, I'm reading this book, and they source it to them that now, in response to industrial fashion, fast fashion, this big global stuff that's going on, and all those big online brands, that apparently 1 in 3 Australians are addicted to online shopping, I read somewhere.
Yeah.
So permaculture is really about, it's just being more in tune with nature. And really the consumption that we're doing now is not in tune with nature. And I think can anybody say they've put their hand up if they have a small wardrobe? Anyone not got a problem with bulging cupboards? You'll notice my hand's not up.
Yeah, I mean, me either.
Yeah, there was about 5 hands there.
Yeah, so, permaculture is really just about listening to signals from nature and designing, becoming a designer of our own lives so that we end up with a future. I guess that's the point.
It's a good question there about how do you think we can engage teenagers in this conversation? And I know, we've been working with high school teachers in the design curriculum, and sustainability is embedded throughout, all 4 assessments in year 11 and 12, and it's a really big deal in the design curriculum, but I don't know about the other areas. Have you guys got any ideas about how we get our teenagers to understand the importance of this?
Well, it's kind of a bit of a conflict in some ways, isn't it? Because they do have a lot of eco-anxiety, and you see a lot of young people shopping in thrift shops. And I had the opportunity just this week to actually help a friend with her granddaughter who said she wanted to learn how to sew. This is a 9-year-old. Yeah. So I went over and, Kay got some fabric for her and we cut it out. And within an hour and a half, we had a simple pair of trousers and made the headband to match. And, so I guess it's sort of one person at a time in some ways until you get a critical mass. But sustainability is in the curriculum. And I know where I live on North Stradbroke Island, at Dunwich School, apparently they do upcycling in year 3. So, there's talk of it, but it's actually living it is the difficulty, actually having that connection from a 45-minute class that talks about sustainability. And then, of course, teenagers are concerned about how they look, and there's image issues, and they're they can be intimidated by, my friend didn't like that, so I'm not wearing that.
Social media.
And so I don't really know what the answer is. All I think is that if the grown-ups in the room model a different kind of behaviour, the teenagers might follow.
Yeah, that's true.
I think, the other part of that process is just, not exploiting their anxiety, tapping into their consciousness around the environment, and that going and buying clothes, I don't think it feels at the moment like a conscious decision, i.e. I need to wear something, I want something new and flash, I've got to impress XYZ. It's just that's...
I've had that on Instagram already, so I can't wear it again.
Exactly,
Unlike me,
Unlike you,
Adventures of the Red Dress.
Times.
A whole stream of things happening. But how do you as parents in the room, how do educators share these stories in the classroom too? Because I think, that conversation that happens, not just in that space, but in the spaces after the classroom, where we don't get to monitor and see what happens, but I think can often create more impact. And, it's hard because you bring those conversations to teenagers, and environmentally sustainable clothing is not necessarily financially sustainable choices at the moment. And so what does that mean? I mean, we think about, if you go to Vinnie's and some of the other thrift shops, then maybe you're still getting them at like op shop prices. I mean, there's a whole industry now of like thrift shop clothes at the same price as I would buy a normal t-shirt or like a more expensive t-shirt. I mean, I've been through some of the kind of trendy hipster thrift shops. Yes, I buy some stuff from there, I'm guilty. But they're like sometimes $80 for a shirt that was made in 1976. And has been worn lots, and great to keep that happening, but like is that actually accessible to people as well? I mean, big challenges, right?
It is a big challenge. But the other thing about school, you know, teaching teenagers and that is using a needle and thread. Like that is
Bring
something.
back home ec.
Yeah, well, it doesn't even
For
need...
all
it
genders.
Doesn't even,
Yes.
yes, definitely. And it doesn't even need to be home ec. Like, one of my learnings was a sewing machine is a machine and things can go wrong with it. If you use a needle and thread, you can do a whole lot of... you can make garments. In fact, I've made a number of garments just with needle and thread. It's not complicated. It's soothing, it's portable... And I think we're scared of that because we've forgotten. We've forgotten. We've done. You know, we need to do a lot of remembering. And I recently created a stitch sampler. So a graphic design friend, Helen, helped me create. So this is running stitch, this is back stitch, and we're printing it out. And in fact, I'm having it printed on full circle fibre fabric at the moment, so that people have got a sampler. So kids you can give them a needle and thread, and this is how we do it. And so I think that sort of skilling in a small way so that they've got the option. And I remember a young man when I did a workshop down at Bond University, and we showed him just how to mend his little band T-shirts. You know, just go like that and then that, like getting these little pinholes in them. And he said, "This is changing my life." And I thought, how good is that? Yeah. You know, that an old skill that we've forgotten and we don't think we need anymore can really make such a difference to people. And you know, just embellishing and enhancing garments is a good thing. I think we all need to know how to do that. We want to cook some meals from scratch, and food, we want to know what goes into it. Textiles are complicated, as you said, like often you can't, it's not easy to make the fabric from scratch, but it is easy to do some simple things. Even if it's not making the garment from scratch, it's putting your own energy into it, so you want to hold on to it for longer. Or if one of your buttons pops or something like that, you can actually do that. Whereas early on in this process for me, I'd find these lovely shirts at op shops, and I do agree that, you know, the price is not there. I always go to the small church ones.
Yes.
And the country ones, that's the tip. And Red Hill Baptist
Dunwich has
Church,
got a fantastic...
It has. So but I mean, the others have put up their price, I guess, to make money to do
And
good
rent.
work. So, yes, I mean, it's kind of... But you've got to be discerning in everything that you do, including...
I think one of the sort of, look at me go, common threads of this evening, I am a father, so I'm allowed dad jokes tonight, is that like there's lots of little things that everyone can do that can create collective impact. And it's not about maybe going home tonight, like rethinking your entire life of consumption, but making considered and thoughtful choices in the rest of our journeys on this planet, which will, you know, if we're consuming roughly 56 items per person per year over the next however many years we're all alive, it's a lot of consumption. And so if we can change the dial on that, you know, Owen, one of my staff members, I'll quote him because it's his little thing. So if you can shift the dial a couple of minutes, you know, now, what does that look like over 3 or 4 days of time? And that change starts to get bigger and bigger. The more people you talk to, the more you do it. And so I think just every little decision matters at the moment for all of us.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, Jane, also is about the education. If we can pull up Jane's manifesto,
Oh, yes.
I think that would be a good point to bring that in. It's do you
Slow
want to run
clothing
through these?
Yeah, well, I wrote this in 2014 after I did a whole year of upcycling in 2014, sewing again, and I realised not many people sew, so I had to broaden out. This is really just 10 ways to reduce your material footprint, and it's thinking more. That's the first one, thinking more, making considered choices, and then choosing natural, quality, local clothes where you can, just having a few, and caring for them. The way that we care for our clothes has such an impact on their lifespan. I noticed there was a question before about microplastics shedding during washing. Dr. Mark Brown said that there's a couple of products that are available. He said they're like snake oil. So I'll just leave that with him. I just think there's not really anything. And of course the natural fibre clothing shed particles as well, threads as well, but they're biodegradable down the track. So just getting back to the manifesto, it's caring, and the RMIT research said that, in Australia, like we pretty much all use cold water, and a lot of us dry clothes on the line rather than in the dryer, but the move to living in apartments, it makes a difference there because you don't have that. And I had that experience for a year, and I thought, oh, okay, a lot of people live in apartments, it's not easy to line dry. But and then the other parts of the manifesto, if you want to get more involved, like learning how to make some simple garments, reviving garments, that's just thrifting and
you can use the
mending.
sewing machines here at the edge.
Of course, at the edge.
We
It's
visited them the other day. It's a great space.
It is a fabulous facility, and it's been there for quite a long time. You just have to get trained on it with Jimmy, and I think that's $20, and then you can book in and go and use it at any time. And the Cleveland Library has just opened a makerspace, and can I say that Carindale Library has just closed a makerspace. There is a petition going around, Save Carindale Makerspace. Don't know whether you heard ABC Radio last Friday, but they were talking about that. Apparently the decision's been made in council it's not used enough, or the space is needed for something else. But one of my recommendations from my fellowship was more opportunities and places to engage in that sort of making behaviours, and there is one closing, so that's a bit sad. But yes, this one's definitely here. And the other things that you can do is salvaging wherever you can the threads, particularly if they're natural fibres, by donating or turning them into cleaning rags, or I actually composted some clothes at one point, and the natural fibres break down quite easily. All the threads are synthetic, so you have to remove them. But really, if you're composting, I've used it as instead of sugarcane mulch. So there's lots of little things that we can do, and that's just old-fashioned thinking. That sort of information used to be passed on through families or learned in schools, and it's sort of missing. But
we can read about this in your book, available at the State Library.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
To loan.
Also on my website. Yeah, there's no need to buy it. Yeah.
Okay, let's.
Can I just add a few things here? I think this is great for my business. I might start sharing some of these things. So thank you. But yeah, I think this notion of care is really important as well, because care often takes time too, and so this idea of thinking and caring go hand in hand. All of our garments are all of the things that are in the top half of this category, and even the idea of caring for these is really critical for their longevity. Yes, the prints will always stay, but also if the funny thing about lots of natural fibres is the best way to care for them is hand washing, actually. And who has time for that?
Sometimes it's quicker. Sometimes it's quicker to hand wash, actually. Just rub the bit that needs cleaning, slosh, spin, hang out.
I also like don't just wear it once. Because, depends, it's a bit harder in Queensland summers.
A
little bit of extra something going on underneath our pits or whatever. But like, I'll wear a t-shirt 2 or 3 times. Again, I just wear all black generally, so it's kind of good for all of the other things. You know, if you actually don't spill things on yourself, you can definitely wear your shirt more than one day. Anyways, random, but the idea of care also is just like thinking about other ways to be more conscious about those items that are really important and special to you. So,
I think we might move into a bit of a direction more about Magpie Goose brand, and we know there's been a handover of the brand a little while ago, and you've sort of moved it in a new direction. So if you want to touch on that, but also I'm aware that we're running out of time and I want to get to some of these questions as well, but your marketing and branding approach, I mean, it's part of who you are. I mean, obviously you live and breathe it. So maybe if you can touch on those, that would be good.
Yeah. What was the first part
The
again?
first one was just about the changeover of the brand and the sort of the new direction.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge that very much so, because like that's part of our story. Maggie McGowan and Laura Egan were the 2 founders of Magpie Goose, so we didn't found this company, Amanda and I. We acquired the company, took over the company from non-Indigenous ownership into Indigenous ownership. Which I believe, and no one's pulled me up on it otherwise after a number of years, that's probably the first business that's transitioned, particularly that sort of works in an Indigenous space, from non-Indigenous ownership to Indigenous ownership in a really beautiful way. They came to us, actually, I'll rewind a little bit because this is part of this story. They did a pop-up here, and our shop open house has always sold Magpie Goose in our store, and we invited them to do a pop-up in Brisbane, and they did a pop-up because we didn't have enough space at the time. They did a pop-up in Avid Reader down the road in West End, and we caught up with Maggie and Laura because we were very interested in the way they operated their business and wanted to talk more to them about it. During that conversation, we realised that they were like very considerate and really trying to do the very best they could as 2 non-Indigenous women running that company. But I walked out, it was a bar that we caught up with them at. So we walked out of the bar, and I looked at Amanda and I was like, I reckon that should be ours. And 3 years later, we got a text message while we were in Cairns. And Maggie said, oh, hey, I'd really love to talk to you about something we've been thinking about. And I looked at Amanda and I said, I told you! I knew this was going to happen. And she was like, nah, they just want to talk about something else. Anyways, they sort of said that after deeply considering about the way in which their brand operated, which is now our brand, that they had always thought about and wanted it to be Indigenous owned, and of all the people that they've engaged with as part of their journey, we felt like the right fit given our, business nous and the way in which our value systems align. So it's a bit of a story about how Amanda and I are now the owners of the company. But that value set that they had founded is still the value set that we operate on today. Like working with artists and community in an ethical manner, in full transparency, teaching and engaging and sharing learnings about the industry with community and around design and textiles. And I think what we've just done with it is kind of try to make it our own, you know, in a sense that how do we want to showcase and celebrate our community stories, but continue to provide opportunities for Aboriginal people to join the movement. And so whether it's through modelling, you know, I think we've almost run out of friends now to invite into our model shoots. But whether it's through modelling, whether it's through the employment opportunities at our retail space and the pop-ups that we run around the country, into whether it's turning up and running fashion shoots in community with the artists and getting community members to help with the photo shoots and taking photos. All of these things are just really about scaffolding the impact that we can create as part of the business.
And we're really proud of what we've been able to achieve. As I said, close to $700,000 worth of artist royalties back to community is massive. But the things that we can't quantify is like the social impact that we create for those people. So the money is easy, right? It's a number and it sounds really amazing. But one of the artists, and I use this example regularly, so if I've told you this story, my apologies. But one of the artists that we worked with in Columbaroo, which was a women's centre, not an art centre, a women's refuge up in Columbaroo, which is in the Kimberley. We worked with that community, and they created a range of designs. One of the artists rang us and said, one of the biggest changes in my life has been working on this project. I'm like, oh, well, that's really lovely. And, it's not about necessarily the pride in her seeing her garments on the runway or seeing them in photo shoots or sending them back and seeing how excited all of her family were to see her designs on these products. It was actually the fact that the money that she was able to generate as part of this process allowed her to have 2 white goods in her house, the washing machine and the fridge, both working at the same time for the first time in 10 years in her life.
Wow.
Like, where's the measurement for that? How do we actually quantify the pride? So all of that joy in terms of mental well-being and emotional and social well-being. But what about the flow-on effects of all the closing the gap statistics around health, education, well-being, this notion that if you can't clean your clothes in a washing machine, not that that's the only way to clean your clothes, but how do you reduce the impact of gnats and different scabies and things like that appear in remote communities? And if you don't have a fridge that's working, how do you have fresh food in your house? And so this movement that we've been able to be part of is enabling a whole bunch of different things that we never would have imagined are possible.
That's great. Just a reminder to put any other questions in, because I've only got 5 minutes left, so if there's any burning question, we'll get to a couple that are here. And I think what I probably will just go with our last question for right now. I was going to ask you about a challenge you've faced and what you've learnt from it, but I think let's go with the positive question, which was, what future development really excites you? What's on the cards? What's the next thing, or something about your business that excites you? I mean, it excites me hearing those stories about changing communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Jane, what's something in the future that excites you?
I think there's a lot of change happening. We are talking about, there's a lot of talk about the circular economy now. And there are some glimmers of hope, like the Seamless, which is the clothing product stewardship scheme. It's got potential to make a difference, but reading their website, 200,000 tonnes of clothing to landfill, and they're looking to reduce, or to kind of make circular 60% of that by 2030. So there's a big lot of movement to happen, but companies like Blocktex, they've used QUT technology they can now separate the plastic from the cotton and making some great products. But and there's there is behaviour change happening, but a lot more needs to happen. And I think the thing to remember is it's volume. Volume is the big problem, and you can't just make a linear system suddenly, using the same. I guess as Albert Einstein said, you can't solve problems using the same thinking used to create them. And that whole idea of growth and more, it's okay, we can do it. We've got green energy to do it and everything, but it's all more. We actually need to talk about the real problem, which is the volume issue. But I'd also like to talk about this one down here about cotton production using huge volumes of water. Can it be described as a sustainable fabric? Well, everything we grow, everything we use, everything we eat uses a lot of water. Cotton certainly does use a lot of water, but so does everything else. Most of the fabrics in clothing are either cotton or polyester, and we've already talked about that as being plastic over here, 60% plastic. So the real thing with cotton is keep wearing it. Wear it to the end of its natural life, and the water used in the original production has lesser impact over time. So everything has water. If you look at how much to make one almond, how much water, you know, like it's just astounding. And I think in a way, cotton's been a bit vilified. Farmers are using water use efficiency measures, and they are producing more cotton from the same amount of water now. So I think the simple thing is nothing about the way we live is sustainable at the moment. We have to change our behaviour.
I mean, talking about water consumption, I heard some pretty interesting stats lately. Quick Google search, maybe do some more Google searching. Although each Google search uses a shitload of water. Each AI generated search, this is totally not fashion, sorry, but if you're going to talk about water consumption, get onto ChatGPT and use between 1.8 to 12 litres of water per search.
Wow.
Get amongst that. Like, I'm happy to wear my cotton shirt. I'll be using ChatGPT a whole lot less.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think, again, my biggest thing about all these conversations, every single one of you in this audience has an opportunity to create change, and you can do that every single day.
And
And
just start where you are, use what you have, do what you can.
absolutely, and bring these conversations into your house. Bring them to your work. Bring them to places where you can spread that message as well. I know the ChatGPT one's awesome, isn't it? How much? Well, not awesome, sorry, but it's a really
It's
interesting stat.
Yeah. This question there, I think probably more for you. What programs or apprenticeships are available in Queensland to help emerging artists so adopt sustainable practices and successfully navigate a sustainable path? Or it could be for both of you, actually. So, you talked about sort of government funding, I guess, for artists,
Yeah.
but that's probably, not sure.
Do you know of anything?
It's not really my area, I'm sorry. I tend to talk about behaviour change rather than do too much research around programs and apprenticeships. So you don't know from a QUT perspective?
No, I don't. No, there's not a lot.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, like Amanda and I, were lucky to just network and find a few people, like Full Circle Fibres. One of our manufacturers in Logan who we use, again, just for a very particular item. But I keep stressing that, we would do so much more locally here if there was the opportunity to. And so it's a big call to Queensland government to think about. Again, it's not about necessarily, creating things in larger quantities, but because if they're subsidised by the government, then smaller operations can create impact. I mean, we'd line up to create clothes here in Australia. We already do that here locally in Brisbane if there was more opportunities to do so.
Yeah.
I think. Sorry. It's not something I'm familiar with, no. But I think being sustainable is about using the resources that already exist. Places like reverse garbage, I mean, there's a great place to source resources. And I think we think of sustainability and sustainable things as something over here, whereas actually it's what already exists is the most sustainable of all. It's not something you buy. It's kind of like more an action that you take to use resources, to be resourceful within your own development as an artist.
Maybe one last little comment from me before we close as well is Magpie Goose has worked with lots of artists and art centres and communities all around the country. And prior to us taking it over, had only worked in Queensland once, up in Hopevale. When we took it over, we did a rerun of the Hopevale collection in different colourways to think about an event that we wanted to be working with and at for the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair. There may just be an SEQ collaboration cooking in 2 weekends' time on an island somewhere near us. So, yeah.
There you go. Hot tip. So I think we will have to end there, unfortunately. But I think, Troy, you might need to plug where the stores are. And what was the website again?
Oh, yeah. www.magpiegoose.com.au. But you can stroll across the road. Hang on, let me get my bearings. Oh, I knew I would be colourful. Across at Aboriginal Art Co., one of the other businesses Amanda and I have across the road, which is a not-for-profit Aboriginal art gallery. Julius Pizza. Everyone knows Julius Pizza, surely. I'm going to try and beat you to the line after this. But next to it is our gallery. We have a flagship store on King Street at Bowen Hills, and in West End, 73 Vulture Street. It's called Open House. It's a business that Amanda and I have collaborated on for about 5 years. So you can find us in all of those fantastic retail spaces.
And Jane has a great Instagram as well. Do you want to quickly tell us about that?
Oh, the hashtag Adventures of the Rest Dress,
And
you
the
mean?
Textile Beat.
Oh, Textile Beat. Yes, Textile Beat's my my Instagram and my website. But I guess it does have historical information there, useful information. But I think everyone just taking actions within their own space is really what I would recommend. I'm not the guru. I just do things and try hard to be sustainable. So anyone can do that. Leadership is an action that you take. It's not a position or a thing that you have. You know, it's actually the day-to-day, the everyday practice that we do. My brother is Professor of Planetary Health, and he often talks to me about the fact that it's the everyday choices and the actions that we all take that make a difference overall. So
it's a lovely
go
note to
forth.
end on. So let's thank our speakers.
Thank you. Awesome.
And I'd now like to welcome Amanda Godwinson to the table.
Look, thank you so much for that really inspiring conversation. Thank you, Jane and Troy and Mel, for facilitating the conversation. So I think we really have heard from game changers here this evening, but they're inspiring us also to make change. I think the big message coming out of this evening's conversation is we need to slow down. We need to think about what we're consuming, and we need to think about how we can do that in a sustainable way and actually have a conversation and start a conversation about our garments and what we're wearing and be really thoughtful about that. And I think that's that really is just, it's a really simple thing for all of us to be able to do. So what a game-changing thought for all of us to be left with. Thank you so much for the conversation. Look, I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the Game Changer series as part of the larger program of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame, which has been running now for about 15 years. So we're bringing to you a lot of interesting entrepreneurs and leaders in our Queensland business community. And on behalf of our founding partners, ourselves, QUT, and the State Library of Queensland, I'd like to thank our partners and our sponsors who make the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame program possible. The contributions that we hear from our Queensland business leaders really honour the impact that everyday Queenslanders make to the development of this great state. And I'd really like to thank our speakers here this evening for doing just that for us. So anyone interested in following the conversation tonight, those who are in person as well as those who have joined us online, the conversation will be available on the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame website, along with previous Game Changer conversations. But of course, if you're looking on websites, don't forget www.magpiegoose.com.au and hashtag the red dress. So thank you And look, thank you very much for coming along this evening and for joining us online. The gallery is, I believe, still open if you'd like to return and have a look at the really interesting Brisbane Portrait Prize exhibition. So thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And please travel safe, and we'll see you at a next Game Changers event. Thank you.